The hum of the Amani was a sound Minsu had learned to ignore. It was the sound of everything working. He moved through the narrow corridor of the research vessel, a tool belt around his hips. His job was to listen for the sounds that were wrong. The tiny hiss of air where there should be none. The faint groan of a stressed conduit. He knew the ship's lungs and veins better than anyone. He was not a talkative man. His friend Jay, the communications officer, was the talker. Jay's voice was often in Minsu's ear, telling a joke or complaining about the recycled coffee. Minsu would just smile and keep working. He liked the quiet. He liked fixing things. The mission was simple. They were mapping a mineral-rich asteroid cluster near Jupiter. The crew was small. Captain Ryu, Jay, the botanist Hannah, and 2 scientists, Subin and Taehyun. Minsu was the engineer. They had been out for 3 months. It was a good crew. That day, Minsu was in the lower utility deck, checking the primary oxygen recycler. Hannah was with him, examining a small growth chamber she had set up near the warmer pipes. She was studying how plants reacted to the ship's artificial light. "Do you think this bean sprout misses the sun, Minsu?" Hannah asked, tapping the glass. Minsu looked at the tiny green shoot. "It gets light on a perfect schedule. Maybe it's happier than a sun bean." Hannah laughed. It was a nice sound in the metal room. Then the first alarm shrieked. It wasn't the gentle ping of a reminder. It was the harsh, screaming alarm of critical failure. The ship shuddered. The lights flickered and turned to urgent red. Captain Ryu's voice, tight with control, burst over the speaker. "All hands. Micrometeoroid strike on Deck C. Hull breach is contained by emergency doors, but the plasma conduit in Sector 4 is compromised. It is overheating. We are venting pressure. Move to emergency stations." Minsu was already moving. He pulled a panel from the wall, his fingers flying over the readouts. The problem was bad. The automatic seals had stopped the air leak, but the damaged conduit was next to the main power feed. If it burst, it would cut power to the entire aft section, including the primary life support and the escape pods. "We need to get to the pods," Hannah said, her face pale. "Go," Minsu said, not looking up. "I have to try and stabilize this. Tell the others." Hannah hesitated for a second, then ran. Minsu worked. He rerouted power. He tried to initiate a coolant flush to the burning conduit. On his screen, the temperature kept rising. A red warning flashed. "Conduit failure imminent." Jay's voice crackled in his earpiece. "Minsu, we're all at Pod 1. The system says the pod bay doors won't open without main power. Can you do anything?" Minsu's stomach turned cold. If the conduit blew, main power was gone. The pods would be trapped. He looked at the schematics on his screen. There was one choice. He could trigger an emergency manual override from the outside of the pod bay. It was a physical lever meant for rescue crews. But to reach it, he would have to leave the safe interior of the ship and go into the service crawlway that ran along the hull. The crawlway had no independent air supply. "I can do it," Minsu said, his voice calm. "Get in the pod. Seal the inner hatch. Be ready." "What are you going to do?" Jay asked, fear in his voice. "The manual release. Just be ready." Minsu didn't wait for an answer. He ran to the equipment locker and pulled on a thin emergency suit. It was only meant for short exposures. It had 15 minutes of air, max. He clipped a tether to his belt, grabbed a heavy manual release tool, and opened the hatch to the outer crawlway. It was dark and cold. The only light was from his helmet. The ship groaned around him. He moved quickly, pulling himself along by handholds. His breath was loud in his ears. He found the emergency access port for Pod Bay 1. Through a small, thick window, he could see the single escape pod inside. He saw Jay's face, pressed against the viewport, wide-eyed. Minsu gave a short, sharp wave. Then he turned to the manual release box. He fitted the tool into the slot. He had to crank it 3 full rotations. It was stiff. He strained, his muscles burning. The first rotation clicked. The second one groaned. Behind him, inside the ship, the overheating plasma conduit finally gave way. The explosion was muffled by the walls, but the shockwave was violent. The crawlway twisted. Alarms screamed inside Minsu's helmet. His air supply indicator started to drop rapidly. A crack had appeared in his suit. He could feel the bitter cold of space seeping in. He ignored it. He heaved on the tool for the third rotation. With a final, solid clunk, it turned. Outside the pod, a green light flashed. The outer bay door began to slide open. The starry blackness of space appeared. Inside the pod, Jay was screaming into the comms. "Minsu, get in. The door is open. We can swing the pod and you can grab the ladder." Minsu looked at the pod. He looked at the open door to space. The pod's engines fired, positioning it to fly out. He saw the faces of his crew. Hana, Subin, Taehyun, Captain Ryu. Jay still yelling. He knew the numbers. His suit was broken. He had maybe a minute of air left, if that. If he tried to get to the pod, if he fumbled, if he blocked the door even for a second, he could doom them all. The Amani was dying around them. They had one chance. His decision was not a grand, dramatic one. It was simple. He was the engineer. His job was to make sure the system worked. The crew was the most important system. He moved to the outer hatch of the crawlway, the one that led directly to the pod bay. He braced his feet. With all his strength, he pulled the heavy manual seal wheel, locking the hatch shut from the outside. This final seal would guarantee the pod bay maintained pressure long enough for the pod to eject cleanly. "Minsu, no." Jay's voice was a broken shout. Minsu looked at his friend one last time. He couldn't speak. His air was gone. He just tapped his helmet twice. An old signal for "it's okay." Then he pushed himself away from the hatch. Floating back into the dark crawlway, he watched as the pod's thrusters glowed bright blue. It slid smoothly through the open bay door and shot out into the void, a small speck against the giant planet Jupiter. It was safe. The cold was absolute. The silence was complete. Minsu felt a strange peace. He had fixed the last problem. He thought of his mother's garden in Gwangju. He thought of Jay finally getting that good cup of coffee. The darkness at the edge of his vision became the only thing. 60 minutes later, the rescue ship Gyeongbok arrived, summoned by the escape pod's distress beacon. They found the Amani dead and dark. They found Minsu in the crawlway. His body was frozen. Their medical scans showed no brain activity. His heart had stopped for over an hour. The doctor on the Gyeongbok shook her head. There was no coming back from that. The universe had moved on. On Earth, the news reports called him a hero. They gave him a medal. People he had never met cried for his sacrifice. Then, as new stories took over the news, the world forgot. But in the silent, airless wreck of the Amani, and in the perfect memory of the escape pod's data recorder, every detail of Kim Minsu's final, quiet act was preserved. A record of a choice, waiting in the dark. The memorial service was on a Tuesday. It was sunny in Gwangju. Jay stood in a stiff black suit, feeling like a stranger in his own skin. He listened to an official he had never met talk about Minsu's bravery and sacrifice. The words sounded big and hollow, like they were describing a statue, not the quiet man who fixed the coffee machine when it was broken. Jay's mind kept replaying the last moments. The sight of Minsu's face through the viewport, calm and focused. The final, terrible turn of the manual seal. The tap on the helmet. Played over and over, a loop he couldn't stop. He was given a medal. He put it in a drawer and never looked at it again. Hannah left the space program within 6 months. She took a job at a botanical garden in Jeju, tending to plants with real soil and real rain. She could not stand the sterile, recycled air of ships anymore. The smell of it brought back the memory of the red alarm lights and the sound of Minsu telling her to go. She never grew beans again. Subin and Taehyun went back to university research, their taste for fieldwork extinguished. Captain Ryu took a desk job, quietly ensuring safety protocols were updated because of the Amani incident report. They all moved on, as people do. The sharp pain of the event softened into a dull, private ache, a scar they learned to live with. Minsu's mother, Mrs. Kim, returned to her small apartment. Her son's room remained as it was. She watered the single potted plant on his desk. The official letters of condolence and the shiny metal felt cold to her. What she held onto was an old, wrinkled photo of Min-soo as a boy, fixing a bicycle. That was her son, not the hero in the news. The quiet boy who fixed things. On Earth, the story of the Amani and the engineer who gave his life faded from the public mind. It was a tragedy, then a lesson, then a footnote in space safety guides. Light years away, the story was just beginning. The Kathari vessel Ishval had been observing the Jupiter sector for a standard cycle. Their mission was passive survey, to record stellar activity and note the technological progress of the local species, humans. They were scientists, not warriors. Their ship was smooth and silent, cloaked from human sensors, hanging in the dark like a stone. They had noted the human research vessel Amani. It was logged as a low-priority observation target. When the micrometeoroid strike happened, their sensors automatically focused. They recorded the thermal bloom of the conduit explosion. They tracked the life signs. Analyst Kalen monitored the data stream. He watched the single human life sign, Min-soo's, divert from the group and enter the compromise section. The logic was unclear. The collective survival probability of the group increased if they stayed together. This was a basic principle. Then, he saw the human perform the manual release. He watched the other humans enter the escape pod. The expected next action would be for the isolated human to also attempt to board. Survival was the prime directive of all biological life. The human did not board. Kalen adjusted his sensors, thinking there was an error. He saw the human move to the hatch and physically lock it from the outside. He saw the human push away into the dying section of the ship. He saw the escape pod eject safely. He watched the single life sign flicker, dim, and then go out. Kalen was confused. He reran the data. He checked for external threats, for weapons, for any coercion. There was none. The human had been alone. It had voluntarily terminated its own survival sequence to ensure the survival of the group. This made no sense to Kalen. To the Kathari, logic was survival. The group was important, but only insofar as it perpetuated the whole. A member would be sacrificed by the group if needed for the greater good. But an individual choosing self-termination? Without an immediate threat to a genetic relative. It was an illogical anomaly. He compiled the data. The final 60 minutes of Min-soo's biosignatures. The unique neurological spikes, the chemical flood in his system. Not just of fear, but of resolve, of a strange calm. The electromagnetic field generated by his brain at the moment of choice was recorded. It was a distinct pattern. Kalen filed his report. He titled it, Incident 73 Alpha. Observation of Paradoxical Altruistic Termination. He classified it as an anthropological curiosity. The human, subject designation, Kim Min-soo, was listed as deceased. The data packet, the full recording of his final hour, his vitals, his neural patterns, was encrypted and stored in the vast archives of the Kathari Science Conclave. It was not forgotten, but it was shelved. Puzzle for another day. Years passed. 15 standard Earth years. On Earth, Jay sometimes visited Mrs. Kim. They would sit and drink tea. They rarely spoke of Min-soo. Their shared grief was a quiet presence in the room, like a third person sitting with them. Hannah sent Mrs. Kim seeds from her garden in Jeju. Life continued in its simple, human way. In the Kathari sovereignty, a different problem was growing. A sickness. It was called the Gray Scourge. It began as a whisper in the data networks of their outer colonies. A pathogen that was both biological and digital. It attacked living tissue and the cybernetic enhancements most Kathari used. It fed on the electrical impulses of nerves and circuitry, twisting them. It was a perfect parasite for their blended society. The supreme sovereign, Elera's father, was stricken. The best minds of the conclave worked without rest. They tried everything. They isolated the pathogen's code. They could see it, but they could not break it. It seemed to anticipate their logical countermeasures. It defended itself with a complexity that felt almost intelligent. Princess Elera watched her father fade. She prepared herself to lead, even as she felt a deep coldness in her own fingers, a sign the scourge had found her. Fear was not logical, but she felt it. The conclave's reports grew more desperate in a late-night session. An old senior analyst named Voron scrolled through archived anomalies, looking for anything, any pattern they had not considered. His eyes, tired from staring at data, passed over a file tagged 73 Alpha, paradoxical altruistic termination. He almost skipped it. What did an ancient human death have to do with a technoplague? But the word paradox caught him. The Gray Scourge was a paradox, both living and machine. It defeated logic. Perhaps only a paradox could fight it. He opened the file. He saw the recording of Minsu's final act. He read Kalen's notes about the unique neurochemical signature. And he had a wild, illogical thought. The human had made a choice that was the opposite of survival. The pathogen was the ultimate survivor, adapting, consuming. What if the signature of that human choice, the pure, self-erasing will, was a pattern the pathogen could not comprehend? What if it was a key that didn't fit any lock the scourge could make? It was a desperate theory. It had no basis in solid science. But solid science was failing. Voron took his idea to the conclave. He presented the data on Kim Min-soo. We do not need his body for its material, Voron argued. We need the echo of his final moment, the pattern he created in that space. We need to go to the source and take a reading, a resonance scan. It may give us the cipher to break the scourge's code. The debate was fierce. Some called it superstition. Others called it their last hope. They looked at Princess Alara, whose skin was now showing the faint gray lines of the early infection. A decision was made. It was not one of certainty, but of last resorts. They would need to go to the human's resting place. They would need to ask for permission. The HFY, the same ship that had recorded the event all those years ago, was prepared for the journey. Its new mission was not to observe, but to request, to seek a cure from a ghost. The journey to Earth was long, even for the swift Kathari ship. Inside her private chamber, Princess Alara tried to meditate. The soft gray lines on her hands were a constant reminder. They did not hurt, not yet, but they felt cold. A deep cold that seemed to come from inside her bones. She watched the stars streak past her viewport. She was traveling to a primitive world to find a solution her own advanced people could not create. It felt illogical. It felt like hope. On the bridge, Voron reviewed the data on Kim Min-soo again and again. He had studied human customs around death. The concept of a grave was strange to the Kathari, who returned bodies to the biological processors. The idea of a permanent, physical resting place was both wasteful and deeply meaningful. He understood that this would be a sensitive request. The captain of the HFY, a stern woman named Lauren, was less concerned with feelings. We state our need. We offer a trade. It is simple. If they refuse, we have contingency plans. No, Voron said firmly. The resonance must be given willingly, by those who guard the place. If there is conflict, if there is anger, it may poison the reading. We must have cooperation. Lauren did not look convinced, but her orders were clear. This was a scientific and diplomatic mission, not a military one. When Earth's orbital control first detected the HFY, panic almost happened. The ship was like nothing they had seen. It was smooth and silent, appearing without warning. 100 weapons systems locked onto it. Hasty calls were made between world leaders. The HFY sent a simple, repeated message on all frequencies. We are the Kathari sovereignty. We come in peace. We request urgent diplomatic contact. We have a medical petition. The word medical changed things. After a day of frantic discussion, a secure channel was opened. The meeting was held on a neutral space station. On one side were human diplomats and military advisors. On the other, a holographic projection of Voron and Captain Lauren. Voron did not look like a monster. He looked old and tired. His voice was calm. He explained the situation. He told them of the Gray Scourge. He showed them, in general terms, its deadly effects. He explained that their science had hit a wall. Then he brought up the story of the Amani. A recording taken from their own archives played on the screen. The humans watched in stunned silence as they saw the last moments of Minsu's life from an external, alien point of view. They saw him crank the release. They saw him seal the hatch. They saw him float away. Jay, who had been brought to the station as an expert on the incident, felt like he was going to be sick. He had to look away. This act, Vorin said, pausing the recording, created a unique bioelectromagnetic signature, a pattern of choice that is foreign to us. We believe this pattern may hold a key to disrupting the scourge. It does not understand such a choice. We need to take a reading of the resonance that may still linger at the site of this human's physical rest. We need to visit his grave. The room was silent. Then a human diplomat spoke. You want to dig up a hero's body? For an experiment? No, Vorin said quickly. We do not wish to disturb the remains. We wish to scan the area. Our technology can read subtle energy echoes. We believe the imprint of his final, selfless decision may still be there. It is a template, nothing more. We would take no physical material. Another voice, angry, rose. This is outrageous. You want to use our dead as a medical tool. Captain Lauren's image stiffened. Our princess is dying. Our sovereign is dying. We are asking. We can offer you things in return. Advanced materials. Power sources. The debate raged for hours. Some saw a chance for a giant leap in technology. Others saw a terrible disrespect. Jay finally asked to speak. He looked pale but calm. His name was Min Su, Jay said, his voice rough. He was my friend. He wasn't a signature or a pattern. He took a breath. But if there's a chance that what he did then could save lives now, that sounds like something he would do. He fixed things. But you cannot just take. You have to ask his family. The diplomats agreed. The request and the strange recording was sent to Earth. A government representative, a kind woman named Agent Park, went to Gwangju to see Mrs. Kim. She sat in the small, tidy apartment. She explained everything slowly. She showed the old woman the alien recording of her son's death. Mrs. Kim watched it without a word, her hands folded in her lap. When it finished, she looked out the window at the evening sky. They want to use my son's echo? Mrs. Kim asked. Yes, Agent Park said gently. They think the goodness of his choice, the pattern of it, might be a weapon against this sickness. They promise not to touch him. They just want to scan the air around his resting place. Mrs. Kim was quiet for a long time. She thought of her quiet boy. She thought of the metal in the box. She thought of Jay's visits and the seeds from Hannah. He always tried to fix what was broken, Mrs. Kim said softly. If he can fix something, even now, he would want to. She looked at Agent Park. But they must be respectful. They must be quiet. It is a peaceful place. With Mrs. Kim's permission, an agreement was made. The Kathari ship could send a small team to the cemetery. There would be human observers. The process would be recorded. No physical remains would be disturbed. The Ishval descended silently into a secured field outside Gwangju. It was a gray, drizzly morning. From the ship, a ramp extended. Princess Alara walked down, supported by her aide, Torin. She was wrapped in a simple gray cloak. The cold inside her was worse. She could feel a faint static in her vision, a sign of the scourge touching her neural implants. Vorin followed with a team carrying delicate equipment. They were met by a group of humans. Agent Park, 2 security officers, and Jay. Jay had asked to be there. He felt he had to be. They walked to the cemetery. It was a small, green place on a hillside. The rain made the leaves shiny. The air smelled of wet earth and pine. It was so quiet, so ordinary. It felt wrong for an alien princess to be here. They reached the stone. It was simple, said Kim Min-soo, beloved son and friend. He gave his all. Alara looked at the characters. She did not understand them, but she understood the feeling of the place. It was not a monument. It was a memory. She felt a pang of something unfamiliar. It was not logic. It was sadness, mixed with a deep respect. Vorin directed his team. They did not set up a loud machine. Instead, they placed small, smooth discs on the ground around the grave. They glowed with a soft blue light. A gentle hum filled the air. "This will not hurt him," Voron said to Jay, who was watching like a hawk. "It is like listening. We are listening for the shape of what he left behind." Elara lay on a special pallet they had brought, placed on the grass beside the headstone. The discs glowed brighter. The hum grew softer, deeper. It seemed to sink into the ground. Elara closed her eyes. She expected to see data. She expected to feel a tingle from the machines. She did not expect to feel warm. A wave of calm washed over her. The cold inside her seemed to pause. In her mind, she did not see a man dying in space. She did not see explosions or alarms. She saw a memory that was not hers. She saw 4 faces, clear and vivid. She felt a surge of worry for them, a deep, protective hope, then a decision solid as a stone. Not a thought of glory or fear or even a thought of an end. It was a simple, clear focus on a task. The task was to make sure those faces got home. Underneath it all was a feeling of love, so quiet and so strong it took her breath away. It was the feeling of a son thinking of his mother's garden, not with sorrow, but with a fleeting, peaceful goodbye. A single human tear escaped Elara's closed eye and traced a path down her gray-marked cheek on the monitors. Voron saw it. The scanners were recording a pattern. It was not a chemical formula. It was a waveform of immense stability and peace, the opposite of the chaotic, hungry pattern of the scourge. The machines were copying it, translating it into a sequence their medical tools could use. The process took an hour. When the discs went dark, the quiet of the graveyard returned. The only sound was the soft drizzle of rain on the leaves. Elara opened her eyes. She felt weak, but the deep, invasive cold was gone. The static in her vision had cleared. She looked at the simple headstone, then at Jay. Her voice was soft. "He was not thinking of stars or heroes," she said. "He was thinking of you, of your faces. He wanted you to be safe. That was all." Jay, who had held his composure for so long, finally let the tears fall. He nodded, unable to speak. He understood now completely. For the first time in 15 years, the memory felt peaceful. The cure was not a thing. It was a message, and the message had been delivered. The journey back to the Kathari ship was silent. Jay watched the strange, smooth craft rise from the wet field without a sound. It vanished into the low clouds. He stood there for a long time, the rain mixing with the tears on his face. Agent Park put a gentle hand on his shoulder. "It's done," she said. He nodded. It felt like a chapter had finally, truly closed. Inside the HFY, the mood was one of quiet urgency, not celebration. Elara was taken directly to the medical bay. The gray lines on her skin were already fading, like frost retreating from a warm window. The deep cold in her bones was gone. She felt tired, but it was a clean tired. Voron and the medical team worked quickly. They took the resonant pattern the scanners had captured in the cemetery, the echo of Minsu's choice, and began encoding it into a treatment sequence. IT was not a drug. It was a frequency, a pattern of energy designed to mimic that final, selfless decision. When they administered it to Elara, it moved through her body like a calm, clear tone. The gray scourge, which fed on chaotic survival impulses, could not process this signal. To the pathogen, it was nonsense. It was a command that said, "Stop existing," wrapped in a feeling of peace. The scourge's own defenses unraveled, fell apart. Within hours, Elara was sitting up, her strength returning. The doctors confirmed it. The pathogen was gone, completely purged from her system. The same treatment was prepared and sent at faster-than-light speed back to the Kathari homeworld for her father. The sovereign Voron looked at the results, a profound awe on his face. His wild, illogical theory had been correct. He had used a ghost to cure a plague. But as he studied the data, he realized something else. The cure was not just a weapon. It was a message. And the message had come from a person who had a mother and a friend standing in the rain. He went to see Elara in her recovery chamber. She was looking at a live image of Earth on a screen, the blue and white planet hanging in the black. "The treatment was a complete success, Princess," Voron said. Elara did not turn from the image. "I know," I can feel it. She paused. What we took, it was not a thing. It was a piece of a soul. We have the cure now. But we took something that was not ours. We asked permission, Vorin reminded her. We asked for a tool, Elara said softly. But we were given a gift. There is a difference. She finally looked at him. We must thank them, not with promises of technology, but properly. Back on Earth, the news was strange and quiet. The aliens had come, done their work and left. No grand announcements were made. The governments involved agreed to keep the full story secret to avoid panic and exploitation. To the world, it was a mysterious diplomatic blip. But for a few people, life had shifted. Jay went to see Mrs. Kim. He brought her hot tea from a shop she liked. They sat in her small living room. It's over, Jay said. They left. The princess. She said Minsu was thinking of us, of our faces, that he just wanted us to be safe. Mrs. Kim smiled. It was a sad smile, but a real one. That sounds like my son, always worrying about others. She sipped her tea. I am glad something good came from it. It makes the quiet less heavy. A week later, a secure package arrived for Agent Park. It was from the Kathari. Inside was no blueprint for a star engine, no sample of amazing material. Instead, there was a simple data crystal and a handwritten note, translated into careful Korean. The note was from Princess Elara. It requested, if it was acceptable, a private meeting. Not between officials, but between her, Mrs. Kim, Jay, and Hannah. A meeting of the people who knew Kim Minsu. She promised no guards, no spectacle. Just a conversation. After much discussion, it was agreed. The location was the same secured field outside Gwangju. It was a clear, cool evening. The Ishval appeared again, just as silently. Only a single ramp extended. Princess Elara walked down, alone. She wore simple clothes, not royal garments. She looked healthy. The gray lines were gone. Behind her, the ship's hatch closed, leaving her alone on the human world. Jay and Agent Park were there. They had brought Mrs. Kim, and Hannah had come from Jeju. Hannah looked nervous, clutching a small potted plant from her garden. Elara bowed her head in the human style. Thank you for meeting me, she said. Her voice was clear. I owe you more than I can say, but I wanted to try. She did not give speeches about galactic peace. She turned to Mrs. Kim first. Your son saved my life. Not with his death, with his choice. I felt it. It was clean and full of love. I wanted you to know that his last thought was of home, of peace. He was not afraid. Mrs. Kim listened, her eyes bright. She nodded slowly. Thank you for telling me that. It is what a mother needs to know. Elara then looked at Jay and Hannah. He knew your faces. He held them in his mind. That was his anchor. You were not just his crew. You were his reason. The peace that settled over the hillside in Gwangju was a real thing. It was not the absence of noise, but the presence of a quiet understanding. For Mrs. Kim, the gray stone was a comfort. It was something solid and permanent from a story that felt like a dream. She would clean the leaves from around it, her movements slow and careful. The potted plant Hannah left grew, its green leaves a bright spot against the gray granite. Jay found he could think of Minsu now without the sharp twist of guilt. Instead, he remembered his friend's dry jokes, his skill with broken machinery, the way he would listen more than he talked. The memory was warm again. He visited Mrs. Kim more, and they would share simple meals, talking about ordinary things. Minsu's presence was in the room, but as a fond memory, not a ghost on Jeju. Hannah tended her gardens. The smell of earth and growing things no longer felt like an escape, felt like a connection. She started a small, private project. She began cultivating a specific kind of white lily that grew near Minsu's hometown. She imagined one day making a patch of them in the cemetery, something living and beautiful to mark the spot. Life moved on in its gentle, human way that I end the Kathari sovereignty. Things were different. The return of Princess Elara with the cure was a moment of profound shock that turned into slow, steady change. The gray scourge was defeated. Her father, the sovereign, recovered his strength. The scientific conclave had the data, the resonant pattern that had broken the plague. But the how of it troubled them. The top scientists, Voron included, presented their reports. They explained about the human Kim Min-soo. They explained about the choice, the paradox, the unique signature. The leaders of the sovereignty listened. They understood the mechanics. A pattern was used to disrupt another pattern. It was logical. Yet, the source was not. A senior counselor, a man named Gavril, spoke at the High Council meeting. We have the frequency. We can replicate it. We can synthesize the cure. The origin is irrelevant. It is a tool now. We should file it and move on. Princess Alara, now sitting on the council, shook her head. It is not irrelevant. The tool is a copy of a moment. That moment was a man giving his life for his friends. If we forget the source, we forget what the tool truly is. We reduce it to noise. And noise can be misused. What would you have us do? Gavril asked, his tone implying she was being emotional. I would have us remember, Alara said simply. I would have it recorded not just in our medical banks, but in our cultural memory. We encountered something pure. We should honor it, not just use it. There was debate. Many agreed with Gavril. The Kathari were pragmatic. The story was messy, involving primitive aliens and graves. It was unscientific. But the sovereign, who had felt the cold touch of the scourge, spoke last. My daughter walked into the silence of that alien place and brought back life. She says the source matters. I trust her feeling. The record will stand as she wishes. So, in the vast archives, the file on Incident 73 Alpha was updated. Kim Min-soo was no longer subject designation, deceased. He was listed as the template, and a new cross-referenced file was created in a section rarely used, Cultural Anomalies and Ethical Paradigms. The title was The Gwangju Resonance, a study in non-logical sacrifice. It was not widely read, but it existed. For Alara, the experience was a seed planted in her mind. Her people saw the universe as a clockwork of logic and survival. But she had felt something else in that cemetery. A warmth that had no physical source. A decision that made no sense, yet was the most powerful thing she had ever witnessed. She began to ask questions. She spent time in the archives, not just studying the Gwangju resonance, but looking at other species, other records of illogical behavior, empathy, grief, art. She started visiting the recovery halls where victims of the scourge were healing. She listened to them not just as patients, but as people. She brought a different kind of presence, one that confused and then comforted the logical Kathari. Voron noticed the change in her. One day, in his lab, he asked her about it. You are studying soft sciences, princess. This is not efficient for a future ruler. Efficiency kept us alive, Voron, Alara said, looking at the waveform of Min-soo's resonance on a screen. It was a beautifully stable line. But that, she pointed, saved us. It came from a place efficiency cannot measure. I need to understand the place. On Earth, another autumn came to Gwangju. The leaves on the tree above Min-soo's grave turned gold and red. One evening, as Mrs. Kim was placing a few late flowers by the stone, she saw a woman standing a little way off. The woman was dressed in plain clothes, but something about her was different. Her posture was too still, her observation too focused. Mrs. Kim stood up slowly. She was not afraid. She felt a strange sense of recognition. The woman approached. It was Princess Alara. She had come back alone in a small shuttle. She carried nothing in her hands. Mrs. Kim, Alara said, bowing. I apologize for coming unannounced. I was nearby. I wished to see the stone. Mrs. Kim smiled. She had grown fond of this serious young alien. It is there. It looks like it belongs. Alara looked at the grave. The gray stone was there, slightly weathered now. Hannah's plant was thriving. It does belong, Alara said. More than you know. She was silent for a moment. May I ask you a question? Of course. What did he love? Not as a hero, as your son. Mrs. Kim's eyes grew distant with memory. He loved quiet mornings. He loved taking broken things and making them work again. An old radio, a watch. He loved the taste of fresh apples. He was shy. He hated big crowds. She laughed softly. He was a very ordinary boy, but he had a good heart. It was always for others. Alara listened, absorbing each detail. This was not in the reports. This was the person behind the resonance, the ordinary source of the extraordinary pattern. "Thank you," Alara whispered. "This is the data I needed." She stayed a while longer, just standing in the quiet. Before she left, she turned to Mrs. Kim. "We will not forget. I will make sure of it." Back in the sovereignty, Alara did not call a council. Instead, she went to the artist's quarter, a place often overlooked by the scientific-minded. She sought out a master stone carver, an old Kathari whose work was known for its soul, not just its precision. She told him the story. She told him of the quiet engineer, the grave on a green hill, the love of a mother. She gave him the simple descriptions: the morning light, the broken radio, the taste of an apple. The artist listened, his logical mind puzzled but his heart stirred. He asked for time. Weeks later, he presented his work. It was not a statue of a man. It was a single, tall column of dark stone. Carved into its surface in flowing lines was not a face, but a pattern. It was the waveform of the Gwangju resonance, the scientific data, but intertwined with the wave were subtle carvings of human things. The leaves of the tree from Gwangju, the shape of an apple, the simple lines of a tool. At the base, in Kathari script and human Korean, were the words, Kim Min-soo. He fixed the broken. Alara had it placed not in a hall of heroes, but in the garden of contemplation, a peaceful place where people came to think. There was no plaque explaining it as a cure or a weapon. It was just a stone with a story told in shape and line. People would walk past it. Some would stop. They would run their hands over the carved wave. They would feel the texture of the leaves. They would not understand it all, but they would feel something. A question, a mystery, a sense of peace. The resonance was no longer just a medical tool. It was a story. And stories, as Alara was learning, have a power of their own. They travel in whispers, not data bursts. They change minds slowly, from the inside out, on a green hill on Earth. Under a tree whose leaves turned with the seasons, a quiet grave held a smooth gray stone from the stars. And light years away, in a garden of quiet thought, a different stone told the same story without words. The echo of a choice was now a permanent part of two worlds. The man who made it was still gone, but what he represented, in his simple, ordinary humanity, had just begun to grow. 5 more years passed. The seasons in Gwangju turned in their gentle, reliable circle. Mrs. Kim's hair was fully white now. She still visited the grave every week, her movements a little slower, but her purpose unchanged. The gray stone was smooth under her fingers. Hannah's lilies had spread, a patch of soft white blooms that appeared every spring. On one of these visits, she found a small, wrapped package resting against the headstone. It was plain, with no note. Puzzled, she opened it. Inside was a simple wooden box. When she lifted the lid, a soft, three-dimensional image bloomed above it. It showed the column from the Garden of Contemplation on the Kathari homeworld. Mrs. Kim saw the carved wave, the leaves, the apple. She saw the words in Korean, Kim Min-soo. He fixed the broken. She did not know how it got there, but she understood. It was a gift from a princess who remembered. She held the box carefully and smiled. She placed it back in the wrapping and took it home. A secret treasure on Jeju, Hannah's garden flourished. She became known for her lilies. She never told anyone why she grew them, only that they were special. She sometimes sent bulbs to Mrs. Kim, who planted them in her own small plot. Life was a series of small, good things. In the vastness of space, the story of the Gwangju resonance had begun its quiet work. It was not a famous legend. It was more like a rumor, a piece of folklore among certain circles in the Kathari sovereignty. Scientists in the medical field knew of the template as a useful, if bizarre, medical breakthrough. But among archivists, artists, and a growing number of young Kathari, the story held a different weight. Princess Alara, now a senior advisor to her father, encouraged this. When diplomatic missions went to new worlds, she sometimes included artists or philosophers alongside the scientists. She suggested they look not just for resources or threats, but for stories, for paradoxes. She called it context gathering. Many of the old guard, like Counselor Gavril, thought it was a waste of time. Sentiment does not build ships or grow food, he would say. No, Alara would reply calmly. But it can save a civilization when logic fails. We have proof. The proof sat in the garden of contemplation. One afternoon, a young Kathari engineer named Chiron was walking there. Her mind was troubled. She was working on a critical problem. The stabilization field for a new deep space reactor was failing. The equations were perfect, but the field would still collapse. Logic offered no more solutions. She felt the pressure of failure. She stopped in front of the dark column. She had seen it before but never really looked. Today she did. She traced the carved wave with her eyes. She saw the unfamiliar shapes of leaves and fruit. She read the words. She knew the basic story, a human whose death brought a cure. It had always seemed like a medical oddity to her. But now, standing there, stuck in her own failure, she looked at the phrase, "He fixed the broken." It wasn't "he solved the equation" or "he built the better engine." It was fixed. It implied something was wrong, and he made it right. Her reactor field was broken. Her perfect logic wasn't fixing it. What if the problem wasn't in the logic, but in the purpose? She had been designing the field for maximum output, for efficiency. But what if the field needed to be stable, not just powerful, but peaceful? Like the waveform carved into the stone. It was an illogical leap. But desperate, she tried it. She went back to her lab and redesigned the field's core frequency, not for raw power, but for harmonious stability. She modeled it on the waveform from the Guangzhou resonance, the one in the medical archives. It worked. The field stabilized perfectly, humming with a gentle, strong power. She had fixed the broken thing by asking a different question. She reported her success, citing the influence of the template's resonant principle. Her superiors were confused but impressed. The story of the column quietly spread a little more. Alara heard about it. She sent for Chiron. The young engineer was nervous, expecting to be reprimanded for unorthodox methods. Instead, Alara asked, "Why did you look to the resonance?" Chiron hesitated. The logic was not working. The column, it speaks of a different kind of solution. I thought maybe the problem needed that. Alara nodded. You used context. You understood that the tool came from a place of care, not just function. You applied the spirit, not just the formula. She saw the future in that moment. It was not about worshiping a human. It was about learning a new way to think. She started a small, informal school. It was not on any official record. They met in the garden of contemplation. She called it the Context Group. She invited engineers, doctors, and artists. They would look at the column. She would tell them the full story. Not just the scan in the cemetery, but the taste of apples, the shy smile, the love of a mother. She would talk about the human concept of fixing something out of care, not just duty. Some dismissed it, but others, like Chiron, listened. They began to approach their own work with a slightly different question. Am I building the right thing, or just building the thing right? The change was microscopic. It did not shake the foundations of the Kathari sovereignty, but it created hairline cracks in absolute logic. And through those cracks, something new began to grow: empathy. Back on Earth, Jay received a communication. It was a formal invitation, translated into perfect Korean. It was from the office of the Princess Heir, Kathari Sovereignty. It invited him, as a friend of Kim Min-soo and a witness to the event, to speak at a small symposium. The topic was the role of context in crisis. They offered to send a ship. Jay was stunned. He was a retired communications officer, not a scholar. He talked to Mrs. Kim. He talked to Hannah. You should go, Mrs. Kim said. You can tell them about the real Min-soo, the one who was messy and loved bad jokes. Not just the hero. It's what he would have done, Hannah added. He'd want you to fix their understanding. So Jay went. The Kathari ship that came for him was small and elegant. He was treated with great respect. When he arrived at the Sovereignty's central world, he was not taken to a grand hall. He was taken to the Garden of Contemplation. He saw the column. He saw the carved wave, the leaves, the apple. He saw his friend's name. And for the first time, he truly understood what Alara had been trying to build. It wasn't a memorial. It was a lesson. The symposium was small. There were maybe 50 Kathari there. He stood before them, feeling very ordinary. He told simple stories. He talked about Minsu's terrible singing in the shower. He talked about how Minsu could never leave a problem unsolved, even if it was just a wobbly table. He talked about the last joke Minsu told him before the accident, a silly one about a chicken. He saw the Kathari listening intently. They were trying to fit these messy, funny, human details into their understanding of the great, stable waveform that had saved them. When he finished, a young doctor stood. The data indicates his final mental state was one of extreme calm and focus. How does this relate to a chicken joke? Jay smiled. Because he was a whole person. The calm didn't come from nowhere. It came from a life of caring about small things, fixing wobbly tables, listening to friends, loving his mother. You can't have the big, calm sacrifice without the small, messy life that leads to it. The resonance isn't just from his death. It's from his life. A silence fell over the room. It was a new idea. The template was not a moment, but a lifetime. Alara, watching from the side, knew the seed had taken root. The echo of Minsu's choice was still traveling, changing shapes, fixing broken understandings light years from its source. The man was gone, but the pattern of his life, in all its simple human ordinariness, was now part of the universe's tapestry. And it was still working, quietly fixing what was broken. Mrs. Kim passed away peacefully in her sleep one winter night. She was an old woman, full of years and a quiet kind of happiness. In her small apartment, they found the wooden box from the Kathari column. She had kept it on her bedside table. Next to it was the faded photo of Minsu fixing his bicycle. Jay and Hannah arranged the funeral. It was simple, just a few friends and neighbors. They buried her next to her son on the hillside in Gwangju. The gray stone from the stars now stood between them. Hannah planted a new lily bulb at the foot of the joined graves. The story of Kim Minsu, as far as Earth knew, was over. 2 lives, lived quietly and lost, now rested together under the same tree. The world had long since moved on. But in the quiet of the cemetery, something new began. It was not announced. There was no ceremony. A few weeks after Mrs. Kim's burial, on a clear, cold morning, a single figure appeared. It was not a human. It was a Kathari, dressed in plain, dark clothes. It was Chiron, the young engineer who had fixed her reactor field. She had asked Princess Alara for permission to come. She wanted to see the place for herself. She stood before the 2 graves. She looked at the human headstones, the Korean script she couldn't read. She looked at the gray stone she recognized. She saw the lilies dormant for winter. She simply stood there, in the cold air, feeling the context she had only heard about. The wind through the pine trees, the distant sound of the city, the smell of wet earth. This was where the resonance began. Not in a moment of death, but in a lifetime of love that ended in a park in Gwangju. She did not stay long. Before leaving, she took a small, smooth stone from her own pocket, a common river stone from her homeworld, and placed it gently beside the first one. A second visitor. A second stone. She was not the last. Alara had made a rule. No official delegations. No crowds. But for those in the context group, those who felt the story had changed their work or their thinking, they could request a pilgrimage. A single, quiet visit. They had to come alone. They had to bring nothing but a single stone from home. And so, slowly, over the years, the stones began to appear. A doctor who had used the principles of the resonance to develop a kinder, more effective treatment for neural pain came. He placed a piece of dark, polished basalt next to Chiron's river stone. An artist, inspired by the column, came. She left a rough piece of crystal that caught the light. A teacher, who now told the story of the quiet human to her students, came. She left a simple, white quartz pebble. The visits were months, sometimes years, apart. No one on Earth ever saw them arrive or leave. The small, sleek shuttles were too clever to be seen. The visitors came with reverence, not as tourists. They stood. They thought. They remembered the stories Jay had told. They remembered the taste of apples and the love of a mother. Then they left their stone and departed. The patch of ground beside Minsu and Mrs. Kim's graves grew into a small, quiet mosaic. Stones of different colors, textures, and shapes, from a dozen different worlds in the Kathari sovereignty. They were not arranged in order. They looked like a natural part of the hillside, a garden of silent memories. Jay and Hannah, now both gray themselves, would visit and see the new stones. They never knew who left them, but they understood. They felt a deep, warm pride. Minsu's circle had grown. It was no longer just a few humans who remembered him. His quiet choice had created a quiet community across the stars. On the Kathari homeworld, the column in the Garden of Contemplation became a well-known, if not fully understood, landmark. The context group grew. They did not become powerful. They were not politicians. They were engineers, healers, artists, and parents. They carried a simple idea: that solutions could come from care, that logic needed a heart to guide it. Princess Alara, now the sovereign after her father's passing, would often walk there. She was no longer the young, dying princess. She was a wise leader. Her people had faced new crises, but they had faced them with a new tool in their minds: the concept of the Guangzhou resonance. It wasn't a magic answer. It was a way of asking a question. What would fix this with care? One evening, Alara stood by the column with Jay. He was an old man now, visiting as an honored friend. They looked at the carved wave together. He would laugh at all this, you know, Jay said, his voice rough with age. All these stones and columns. He'd say we were making a fuss. Alara smiled. I know, but the fuss is not for him. It is for us. We needed to learn. He was the teacher, a very reluctant one. They were quiet for a while. The twin stars of the Kathari system were setting, casting long shadows. What do you think is the lesson? Alara asked. After all this time, Jay thought about it. He thought of his friend's life, not his death. I think the lesson is that the universe isn't cold. We put the cold there. We think everything has to be hard and logical to be strong. But Minsu showed that the strongest thing, the thing that echoes across space and time, is a soft thing. A choice made for love. It's the one thing the darkness can't eat. The scourge couldn't understand it. Maybe nothing truly bad can. Alara placed her hand on the cool stone of the column. She felt the carved wave beneath her fingers. She thought of the small, growing mosaic of stones on a green hill on a distant blue planet. A network of remembrance, connecting star systems. He fixed more than he ever knew, she said. That was always his way, Jay replied. Years later, when Jay passed away, his family buried his ashes in the same cemetery, under the same tree. Hannah's lilies had spread across the whole slope by then. A sea of white every spring. The stones from the stars kept coming. One more appeared after Jay was laid to rest. It was a deep blue stone, placed by an older Chiron, now a lead designer. The story never woke up the wider galaxy. It never sparked a war or an alliance. It didn't need to. On a peaceful hill on Earth, under a spreading pine tree, 3 human graves are surrounded by a quiet garden of lilies and a cluster of strange, beautiful stones from other worlds. The stones don't explain themselves. They just are, and light years away, in a garden of contemplation, a column stands with a wave carved into its side. People touch it and feel a sense of peace they can't quite name. The man who was dead for 60 minutes is still gone, but the echo of his choice, born from a simple, loving life, is now a permanent part of the universe. It is a whisper in the silent places, a question in the minds of those who seek to fix what is broken. It is the proof that a single, soft, human heart can send out a wave that never really ends. It just keeps traveling, touching one quiet stone, one quiet mind, at a time.